After all art is experience.
Hello and welcome to The Company Doctor for an episode all about accelerating sales. Niall Anderson is the CEO of Smart Tasking, the specialists in helping global organisations solve operational business challenges with practical expert help. Here he joins Gary to reveal the secrets of optimisation, the truth about likeability, and the sales trends that lie just around the corner. Gary, Niall, over to you.
Hey Niall, thank you so much for joining this episode. This episode is Sales Acceleration Secrets, in brackets, S.A.S.
Very good.
Just one of those things I thought would be funny, but it wasn't probably. Welcome. How are you?
I'm very good, Gary, and thank you very much for the invitation to join me on your podcast. Looking forward to it.
Well, it's a pleasure. We've been looking forward to it because who better than Niall Anderson to talk about sales acceleration secrets? So I thought, Niall, the best way to get started, as always, is maybe for you to introduce yourself briefly and the company that you work for. So let us know about you.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Gary. So I'm one of the founders of a company called Smart Tasking, really all about business optimization. And clearly part of that is how do they get to sell more and accelerate their growth through sales. But a quick bit of my background. I started off life as an apprentice in a long forgotten industry the UK used to have called the defence industry, which really gave me a good grounding in life, but taught me to be pretty practical and logical way of thinking about things. So I am actually an engineer at trade, I think, and that helps me think about stuff. And then went on to kind of really work way through from there, got into sales pretty early in my career, and then really got a passion for kind of helping our clients and my clients just to achieve their own growth expectations through a change of behavior and way they think about sales, leading up to, some would say, probably over-promoted, ended up on main board positions of a couple of tech companies, and then really realized I had a bit of an itch to go and do something for myself, and hence became one of the co-founders and co-owners of smarttasking.com.
That's brilliant. And we're going to dig into that a little bit more. I think you're being very humble. You're a very experienced sales director in many big corporations in the past, but we'll dig into that as we go through. So I guess my first question is, you mentioned that Smart Tasking is an optimizer. What is an optimizer to the uninitiated?
So it's really taking a look at clients and really helping them to understand what they need to do differently to really optimize their performance. And really there's two lenses. They're either optimizing for top line growth, or they may be optimizing for bottom line profitability, which is usually a combination of the two. So how do we do that? We really take a look at how they're operating, look for ways to improve there, and also become part of their team. So we got to do it with them and alongside them to get the maximum return for the investment they make with us. But it's really about making them operate faster, smoother, more efficiently, and to really start to accelerate their own growth aspirations.
Well, that's great. I mean, what a great intro to talking about sales acceleration or optimization, and using your terminology. But it's interesting, actually, Niall, because lots of businesses, they want to accelerate, they want to get things moving. But from your experience, what's the difference between what people normally do to sell and accelerating growth?
Yeah, I think a couple of things there. So for me, it's really about some underpinning behavior, really. I think whenever you're selling, you have to have a deep understanding of the client you're trying to sell to, understand whatever you're providing to them and how it fits with their own objectives. Too often in my career, salespeople get overly focused on their own proposition and what they're trying to sell, rather than the impact or the value it creates for the buyer. And that's often the missed trick. And they wonder why they're not as successful as they should do, is they're kind of trying to sell what they have rather than what the client actually needs and is ready to absorb or take on board. So it's really down to having that deep knowledge and understanding of the client and what they're trying to achieve, which is often forgotten along the sales journey.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You talked about the value, and it kind of leads me to ask a question, really. So if you're lifting the covers on the secrets, so we talk about the sales acceleration, what are the key things then that people need to do that make the biggest difference?
Well, I think things to do is when you accelerate sales is to start with recognizing that you need to qualify well and really understand if you can help the client. And that means learning to say no or changing the process and providing another service. But let's not forget the value you can only perceive by the person buying the service. You can't give someone to value, ask for the value that they recognize and they're trying to achieve. And again, you can only do that by having built up a deep and trusted relationship with your clients, which usually comes through a level of collaboration. And if the client won't collaborate with me, my chances of being successful are somewhat remote and removed. So I always try and look for triggers to find a way to co-create a solution and take that client on the journey with us would really help achieve more success.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you must work with lots of companies around the world. And when you work with different companies, is everyone going through the same kind of thing? Are they in the same situation? Or have you come across people that are really good at doing this stuff?
I think majority are struggle with this, right? Particularly in the world we live in over the last few years, right? Selling is based on relationship, and I do believe people buy from people, but they buy from people that they trust and can create a value they recognize and work together on. Now, the ones that do really well, typically either have a very unique proposition that there's a natural need for it, or they disrupt the current thinking of the client or the buyer and help co-create that solution, which often means it doesn't go out to a full-blown RFP or a tender response, because I actually co-create the solution, but they can also start to recognize the consequences of doing something or doing nothing. Clearly, people make an investment to help them achieve their own objectives. I'm old enough to remember the days at the end of the last century where people were buying technology just for the sake of buying technology because they're worried about what happened at December the 31st, 1999, and guess what? Nothing happened. It was odd. I mean, people on standby thinking systems and technology would close. It didn't. But other than that, people only make an investment if they can make a direct correlation to how it's going to help them achieve their objectives. If we can't demonstrate and show we actually recognize that, the chances of winning are really removed because we're now competing for budget spend with our clients against lots of other items, not just technology or optimization improvement or investment.
Yeah, I mean, as you were speaking about it, it conjures up some thoughts for me because I talk to lots of people also, and they talk about RFPs and win rates and things like that. And I think the average win rate's on like 30%, which means that people are losing 70% of the time. So, building on what you've just said, what's your thoughts on that then? So what are people missing? Because 70% of the time they're obviously getting it wrong.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. I think a lot of companies would love to have 30% win rate, and some are lower than that, right? But I think it starts to start the process. They end up bidding things they've not influenced in how they've created it, and therefore they're perhaps very late to the process, being asked to respond to something they actually should say no to, but go back and say, I'd love to work with you, but I just need to know more about you, rather than just trying to respond to an RFP. My view is you should at least be winning more than you're bidding, more than you're losing. So 50% will be a good benchmark. We hope, right? But it really, by qualifying well, you have to recognize that there's a lot of bid cost. And sometimes they try and resource lots of RFPs and don't get any of them because they're too thin on resources, rather than actually focus on the ones they can win and doing a better job with that to try and improve that. So clearly it's a balance between saying no more often, or can we change the process, and not wasting time on bids you're never going to win, right? So if I'd had a pound, a euro, or a dollar for every salesman that said, when we lose something, we lost on price, then we all know they didn't. They lost on relationship, and they lost on not being able to create enough value the buyer recognized. Actually, when they win a deal, it's all about them and what a great job they did, and they forget that.
I'm
selling
so amazing.
to team. Aren't I amazing? But selling in today's world is definitely a team sport, and that team includes the client.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting during COVID times because it kind of brought things to a head. I mean, talking about the value, COVID was interesting for business because lots of companies had to pivot. As some people seem to do well, maybe technology. What have you seen happen as a result of COVID? Have you got any examples of businesses that used the pandemic to either accelerate or fine-tune what they did and made it work, even when others didn't?
Yeah, I think it's those companies that responded fastest and pivoted to that. One client I work a lot with coming from an industry that was very much used to going to a place of work to do the work, but they really accelerated in the embracing of technology. And it sounds odd in the world we live in, but even down to equipping their teams to work remotely. They're in a very compliant environment, so they're used to going to work to do the work. But they really pivoted and embraced technology and automation to optimize their environment. And they've had a pretty stellar performance over the last few years, and they are leading their industry segment by the use of technology. So we've seen that. Underneath that is a big change in culture, a change of how people actually do their work. So I think it's the clients that embraced it, pivoted, and probably accelerated their own evolution, come out of the pandemic in the strongest position. Those that kind of sort of batten down the hatches and kind of buried their head in sand a little bit, they don't come out quite so strong. So I think the pandemic just accelerated the evolution of clients as they develop their own way they monetize what they actually do by using technology and really embracing new ways of working.
Yeah, no, it's been interesting to see. I mean, I know you used to be a rugby coach until recently, and if you're not getting results in a business or in sales, some people complain that their salespeople are not getting results. It's their fault. Is it the coach or is it the team?
Oh, it's definitely the coach, right? So as you know, I have my own business and I'm a co-founder. Too often I think about if I went back to a big corporate job, I would definitely turn the organization chart upside down. So I think do away with the title of manager and sales director and CRO. They're a case of being a mentor, a coach, or a super coach, or a performance coach. So I think the job of a leader is to coach their teams to improve performance. And most people understand that in a sporting environment, whether it's rugby, football, team sport, individual sport, it's incremental changes that make difference. And everyone kind of gets that. If you're running a marathon, you've got to go and train. When you talk to sales leaders and say, when was the last training session you had with your team leading up to a key pitch or a significant opportunity? Are you actually coaching them on that journey? Or are you just asking, when's the deal going to happen and what's its value and is it in the forecast? It doesn't move the dial. We've got to much more focused on helping to coach salespeople and test them, right? And learn in a safe environment. But when was the last time we saw a salesperson practice a presentation, say, can I grab a few people? I've got a big pitch on Friday. Can you validate and ask me a question? I'm going to ask them in best prepared. So it's down to a lack of preparation. Coaches do not let a team go on any field without preparation. Why do we let salespeople go in front of key calls and wonder why they think they come second, but they probably came 8th or 9th and they're never going to win it anyway, right? So let's focus on making a few changes.
But does it ever reflect on the players? I mean, I know, for example, you won't mind me sharing, but you used to work in a pub.
I did used to work in a pub.
You still did it, or you used to, right?
I still like a pub, yeah.
No, we just go to a pub, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But someone came, you told me the story once, someone came to the pub who was really impressed with your relationship skills. Obviously, you have good relationship skills, and they gave you a chance, they offered you a job. Is there an ideal type of person that is attracted or is good in sales, do you think?
I would definitely believe that, right? A lot of people think about, you're born to be something. Well, I don't think that. I think everyone can be changed, developed, and grow. But there is a mindset that underpins that, and there's been plenty of work around growth mindset being formed early in our development. But I think the skills that underpin a good salesman is that ability to really invest time and be a good relationship builder. And back to example, I lived in a pub, got to know an MD of a business, and I was just being myself by chatting to him, welcoming him, making sure he got his favourite glass and favourite chair at the bar. I got to know him really well. But I genuinely invested in the relationship, and he then invested in me for the first 14 years of my career, and I am indebted to him forever. But I think too often people are very superficial about building relationships. And they go, I've got a great relationship with the client. And you ask one or two basic questions, and they really don't have a great relationship with the client. And that's my point of when you lose a deal. I think you lose a deal on that relationship because if you have a strong relationship, the client will share with you where they can, right? The proposition isn't quite right. The level of investment is not quite where they need to be. If you have a relationship, you can then decide to either walk away from that deal, which is not a good return for your own company, or at least have a conversation about that. But to walk away and say, I've lost on price, that's just poor selling. People don't lose on price, in my belief.
So do you think we can kind of dig into some of those secrets then? Because we're kind of divulging sales acceleration secrets. If relationships are that important, and a lot of people will glibly say, as you said, I know the customer well, I know his wife's name and when their birthday is. From your experience, is there a better way to maximize relationships in a genuine way?
Yeah, I think whatever you do, it's got to be authentic and genuine, right? And I'm old enough to remember the days where we didn't have all the tools that are available to now, right? So I think there's no excuse in the modern way of selling not to know what's going on with any particular business, whether they're a listed or an unlisted privately owned company. There's free information out there to give you some sense of what they're trying to do. The same thing, right? There's social media platforms, there's LinkedIn, right, which helps us maintain our visibility in a credible way with our clients. But you have to really invest and remember, not be kind of fake about building that relationship. I've got examples of people that I still work with today that my first commercial relation with them was in my 20s, which is 35 years ago. And we still have a business relationship. But you build together and you become trusted. It's when they start to ask your opinion and shared advice, then you really have got a trusted relationship. And so you have to go a bit deeper. You can't do everybody. I definitely recognize that. But those that are important, I think you end up forming some really strong relationships with our clients and buyers over a period of time. but it takes a level of conscious effort to remember things about them, not to keep asking them the same questions, where'd you live, how many kids you got, you married. It's all, basic stuff, right? But it's going to be deeper than that and becoming really credible at building those relationships, which I say takes effort and a conscious approach to doing that.
But you probably do it naturally. For people that are listening that kind of want to be better at it, what's any advice you'd give them to improve relationships beyond what you've said?
Yeah, I find ways to show you're thinking about them. So a really good example is one of our clients right now is going through their private owned company, their private equity owned company. They're on an acquisition trial. And I just saw a really interesting report giving people a different view of how you can think about when you're looking at an M&A target, what things to think about. All I did was just copy and paste the link from a social media platform and emailed it to that person, which shows that I'm really thinking about them. I'm not just waiting for our next meeting or next catch up. It's a simple note of, hey, I saw this, thought about where you are. It really made me think about a few things we should be looking for when we do consider an M&A target. Just send it to him. Straight away, he responded and said, thanks to that. I hadn't seen this. It's really helpful. But underneath, I'm showing them I kind of care about them and really not just, trying to be a buyer seller. There's nothing in that for me. I'm just being generous with something I've seen and thought we would like it. So I would definitely say be generous.
Great advice.
Yeah, be generous with people. Remember things that are important to them. And the thing that really annoys me is when you are generous with people, then they disappear for a few years and then they come back round again when they want to help with something or they're looking for another job or another piece of advice. That's not very authentic. You wouldn't treat your friends like that. So just find a level of natural balance with people, how they want to be invested in a relationship as well. And I think that really helps. But be authentic. Find ways to show and demonstrate that you think about people.
Yeah, you are naturally good at that. And, that's why I was asking, because I think you are naturally good at it and you do it, genuinely. But not everyone thinks that way. And I was just trying to find a way for people that don't actually think that way to start thinking that way.
Yeah, well, maybe some practical advice I might do is I often think about my connections of, as we do in our private lives, right? Who do I want to see on a monthly basis? Who do I want to speak to on a monthly basis? Who do I want to speak to on a quarterly basis? And perhaps who do I want to see on a 6-monthly basis? And I just run a simple spreadsheet that says, I've not spoken to this person for a couple of months. I'll just drop them a note with think about you, saw this. How's it been going since the last time we caught up? Just being proactive with that in a kind of genuine way. And if you talk to my connections, they would say that's kind of how we are. And some go, we speak every week, every month. Some go, no, we touch base every few months, and that's kind of fine. And more if we're doing something together, or less if we're not. I also would say be generous with your network and connections you have. If you know someone can help somebody else, just introduce them, connect them, find a way for them to meet with no other view of it. It's just a good thing to do for people. Be generous with that. And at some point, who knows, they'll be generous back with you. But just be known as a good networker and a good broker of relationships, I think is a useful skill to have.
Okay. And Neil, how important is being likable? And that's an odd question, really, but is likability an important thing? And how do you, if it is, how the hell do you make people like you more?
Yeah, that's a great question, Gary. Right? I think likability underpins a lot, particularly for salespeople and those that face clients. We have to recognise not everyone likes everyone, right? We're all different. So it's been knowing really when to sort of just flex your personality or natural traits a little bit to meet the person you're talking to. But fundamentally, if you have very strong personality traits that aren't moldable or bendable to people, then you can push people away from you. It doesn't mean being not authentic and change what you are, but just try and fit in with as many people as you can. Just flex your personality, recognizing that when to be a bit more out there, a bit more vivacious to how you operate, or when to be a bit calmer and a bit more reserved. And everyone's different. But I'm with you. Likability is a key factor, I think.
That's great. I like you, by the way. So I want to switch tracks a little bit. It's a well-known path of being business issues driven is an important driver to help people buy from you. Are there any kind of trends or things that people should look out for linked to business issues, particularly in the current market, that people should be aware of and focus on?
Yes. So a couple of things to think about and, to give away a few tips, right? One thing I think the last few years has taught us that we are competing for any investment with things we weren't competing with in the past. So a good example may well be we're normally, in the world that we operate is normally in the technology area budget, right? So normally competing with other technology-based projects. But over the last few years, we're now competing with other investments. It could be they need to be investing in their facilities, maybe to invest in their pensions, pot for their business, but we're now competing with other investment levels. So we really need to understand how any investment's going to be funded. Is it coming out of operational existing expenditure, just going to change it and point it in a different direction? Is it coming out of a special budget to drive transformation? Or is it coming out of soft savings in other parts of the business? But we need to understand, is it going to be a capital expenditure or an operating expenditure? And my experience tells me, you ask a salesman just those few questions. What is the budget that's been allocated to this thing? And where's it being funded from? I.e., where does it sit in the P&L? And you'd be surprised that most salespeople just don't know. And they end up getting their solution people design a very complicated solution that perhaps doesn't quite meet the budget, and or they can't describe the value it's going to give to the client. And they wonder why the project just gets delayed and that committed deal for the quarter gets moved to the following quarter because it's just not important enough for the client. So I think we need to think about, what am I competing with? Other internal expenditure, not just the technology investment budget.
Yeah, okay. That's really useful. And you're a consultant, you meet lots of companies, different people. And when you go in, I guess from your experience, you know what you're looking for. From your experience, what are the top tips to accelerate sales? So you talk to someone, they're really keen to put the foot down and accelerate. What would be your top tips to help them move the dial?
So firstly, I really understand what their overall objective of the business is. As I said at the beginning of our conversation, Gary, they're either trying to grow the top line or they're trying to grow the bottom line, or a combination of the two. So what's the overall business trajectory of the client or the prospect? If there's a compliance driver in there, we know that's something they have to get done. So it's quite important. But are they trying to make an investment to grow their business through, different customer experience, or they're trying to grow their business via retention, back to some of the things we optimize around. So one of the predominant drivers for the client is always where I want to start. Then I want to really test out their appetite for change. A lot of people talk about, we're going to change the way we structure our sales team, we're going to change the way we go to market. And you go, well, really, are you? What are you going to do different? And is it different enough to actually delight the customer in some way? So those sort of questions I want to start having early in the conversation. I'm really just trying to sense out what is the real appetite and driver for any significant investment or change in how they currently operate. And again, some of that can be done remotely. You can do that remotely before you meet the client in some cases, just by doing some extra research, which is another trait of making sure that clients are trying to accelerate their growth by selling to their clients, is make sure they're doing adequate preparation and research before every client meeting.
And now you're armed and dangerous. What would you do with it?
Now you're armed and dangerous. You've got to find the right stakeholders. And you've got to really find which function gets the biggest benefit of what we're trying to sell, right? And sometimes we get surprised with the person we're trying to sell to, that they have their own agenda. The actual beneficiary of what the investment is perhaps a different function. I'm often, with my background, I'm often looking to how does that client serve their clients? Who is worried about the customer experience, or who's worried about selling what that client does, because they're a big stakeholder in any decision to invest. If we get them on board, then they'll support any investment for any changes in the back office or changes in how they operate, because they can link it to them driving customer growth. People don't buy things just for the sake of buying,
Apparently not. It was good to know.
Apparently not.
I've got a couple of big questions for you, and then we're going to find out about your musical taste. So just a couple of questions. The first of the two is just reflecting. You've got so much experience and wealth of knowledge. Looking back on your career, knowing what you know now, I suppose. If you were giving advice to your younger self, reflecting on that background, what would you advise yourself to do?
Good, great question, right? So looking back, I think what we all learn is we've better right, and I definitely believe none of us have finished yet, so we still keep learning. But I think too often the sales professional, right, and I'm proud to say I'm a sales professional, right? I've been a salesman most of my life and career. But a lot of the way we're driven and managed is by an output. Questions like, what's your number for the month? What's your number for the quarter? How are you looking for half year? They're very kind of output based. I would always encourage people to think about the inputs. How much effort am I putting in with my clients? How much time am I spending? How many meetings am I having? How many opportunities do I get to actually propose something? Because I need to focus on my input metrics, which are a key behavior, which will then improve my output metrics, which are the deliverables to the business. So I definitely focus more on that. And I'd find a natural rhythm and cadence to do that, because otherwise you become a kind of a boom and bust salesperson. You have a great quarter because you've got lots of stuff in flow and you win or lose it. but then you forget to do your business development, and then you go to having a pretty quiet quarter. Then it comes around again, and over a year, you end up with an average year. The mindset's got to be, is this month better than last month? Is this quarter better than last quarter? And focus on the input metrics that will drive the outcome and the output. So tip for a sales leader, definitely focus on the input metrics. What's the level of activity like? How many customers are we actually talking to? Where we engaged in collaborative workshops, et cetera, et cetera. Then you'll start to see the quality and how you can drive an output, which is a successful conclusion to the sales process.
I mean, it's interesting you should say that, because I know a lot of sales teams have multiple metrics, maybe too many metrics. Do you think you can get bombarded by too much data?
I think you need to focus on the data that's most important, but do it in a kind of practical and pragmatic way. Otherwise, you end up with too many bits of information. You may turn it into a great sales plan, but you never actually go and execute against it. So make it simple to operate, and make sure you drive those behaviors through your sales teams to make sure there's a consistent level of activity, which kind of becomes the team standard. If we're in this team, this is what we expect, and therefore we start to predict a better outcome rather than this kind of constant surprises in the last week, last month of the quarter when things don't happen.
I mean, it's interesting what you say, because look, you've seen all sorts of companies, all sorts of people, and you've probably seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. I don't want you to name names, but during this journey, I guess the good ones are few and far between. Can you think of a team or even some people, without naming anyone, that you've come across and you thought, well, these guys really stand out, and if everyone could be like them, sales would be so much better?
In my career, I've seen some great salespeople, some great sales leaders, but I've seen a lot of average people. I think one area to stand out, reminding me now of that question, is really where the culture is good within the team. So they have a high performance culture, which means there's consequences, both positive and negative, right? They've kind of created a team standard. The culture is good, and they really focus down on qualification of the opportunity, right? Because they can't resource every opportunity. So they really qualify really well. But when they go after an opportunity, they then look to find ways to delight, surprise the client wherever they possibly can to make sure they stand out as a differentiated offer. And then when they celebrate the successes, they win. So I see it as a really good example of a team that works together with a consistent view of how they're going to operate, what they focus on, core behaviors leading to successful outcomes.
Good reflection. Okay, we've got the last question, then we're going to your musical taste. So the last question here, and this is important for us because it kind of summarizes the episode. So if you could give 3 takeaways for sales acceleration secrets, what would they be? And only want 3. On the spot, Mr. Anderson.
Qualification. Qualify better, which means you've got to say no to some things. Do it in a professional way. You might be surprised what the client tells you when you go back and say, I'm not going to bid this piece of work. I would then build on that. You've got to look to find ways to differentiate yourself and maybe disrupt the process, because the world we're living today, people go to market and they'll be looking for various providers and suppliers, right? So you've got to find a way to differentiate yourself and disrupt the process. I would do that. But most importantly, I often question, if a client won't allow us to collaborate with them and co-create a solution, I already know that we're on the back foot a little bit to win. So my 3 takeaways would be: qualify well, look to disrupt or differentiate the process, and find ways to actually collaborate with the customer so they can co-create the solution. Will be the behaviors I think make a bit of a difference if you're a sales leader running a sales team.
Wow, that's gold. Thank you, Neil. That's fantastic. So listen, we're going to get to a musical taste, but before we do, I wanted to thank you so much. You've got so much experience. It comes out as if it's an obvious thing to you because you're close to it. But I think, for people listening, there's some real gold in there, and we're really going to benefit from it. So thanks for coming on. And before we go, we as a lot of people know, we have a podcast playlist on Spotify where we collect from our guests some music taste that is inspirational or means a lot to them. So 1 or 2 tracks, Neil, from you, that we can add them to the playlist.
Good, Ronan. Thanks, Gary, for giving the opportunity to talk with you. I've really enjoyed that. My 2 tracks, you mentioned before about me being a rugby coach. So I coached a bunch of young guys from the age of 6 to 18, and I needed to find some ways to give them some inspirational music in the pre-match changing room, which have become 2 of my favourite tracks, one from my era and one a little bit more they connected with. So the first track would be Eminem, Lose Yourself. is a good pre-match warm-up or a pre-conference warm-up, maybe.
Nice.
And the second one is more from my era, is one of my all-time favourites by Blondie called Dreaming. If you listen to the drum beat in there, you cannot help but feel more motivated and energised. So there'll be my 2 tracks.
I love those 2 tracks. They weren't what I was expecting, to be honest, but they're great. And we're going to add them to the playlist. And thank you, Neil, again for joining us on this episode. You've been listening to Niall Anderson, Sales Acceleration Secrets, S.A.S. Thank you, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks, Gary.
Don't forget, you can catch up on all previous episodes and Company Doctor goings-on by visiting thecompanydoctor.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.